All right, now we want to take you to New Haven, where a press conference is going on right now. We're learning more information live as it happens about a 2023 homicide. We know that Mayor Justin Elicker, as well as police leaders, are providing an update. Let's take a live look and listen in to this update about a 2023 homicide in New Haven.
He was raised in New Haven, Connecticut. He attended New Haven Public Schools and graduated from Wilbercross High School in 2016. Ramon was a family-oriented, caring, respectful, and fun-loving individual whose presence brought joy to all those around him. He had a deep passion for sports, particularly basketball and wrestling. Throughout his life, he participated in numerous basketball leagues, and during his high school years, helped lead his teams to 3 basketball championship victories. Following high school, Ramon built a strong work ethic through employment in property management, landscaping, and construction. He was always willing to work hard and continuously sought opportunities for personal and professional growth. During this time, he also discovered a passion for barbering while working in several barber shops throughout New Haven. Ramon often spoke about his dream of attending barber school and building a career as a professional barber, although he was never afforded the opportunity to pursue that dream. Tragically, on March 15, 2023, while waiting for a Connecticut transit bus, Ramon was shot multiple times, sustaining critical injuries to the head and leg. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, he succumbed to his injuries 2 days later on March 17th at the age of 25. His untimely death devastated his friends and family. The pain of losing Ramon continues to be felt every day by those who loved him and were touched by his kindness, his loving and unwavering spirit. Ramon's life was one of tremendous promise and potential. He was a young man with ambitions, goals, and a bright future ahead of him. Those responsible for taking his life not only robbed him of that future, but also deprived his family and loved ones of the countless contributions he was destined to make. Ramon was the type of person who welcomed others without judgment and treated people with compassion and respect. Had he known the suspects responsible and understood their struggles, Ramon would likely have offered them encouragement, support, and guidance, rather than condemnation. Having grown up in New Haven, Ramon understood firsthand the challenges that many young people face. Yet he chose not to become a product of negative influences or peer pressure. Instead, he focused on family, sports, work, and self-improvement. His life serves as an example that despite difficult circumstances, it is possible to make positive choices and pursue a better path. Ramon would have encouraged the suspects to think carefully about the consequences of their actions, reminding them that violence not only harms its immediate victims, but also leaves lasting wounds on families, friends, and entire communities. His story is a powerful reminder of the value of human life and the far-reaching impact of senseless acts of violence. Today, Ramon's memory lives on through the love of his family, friends, who could all continue to honor his life and cherish the countless memories he created. Though his life was tragically cut short, his legacy of kindness, resilience, and compassion will never be forgotten. Thank you, Ms. Tiffany. And with that, I invite any other family members who would like to speak to the podium. Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
Do these 2 suspects have any?
All right, you have been listening and watching a live press conference updating the public about new information involving a 2023 homicide. And you just heard from Police Chief David Sinelli, and he mostly spoke about the victim in this case, Ramon Yates. He was just 25 years old when he was killed in March of 2023. Now, we didn't hear the chief talk much about the suspects. We can tell you, though, that 2 suspects, Talon Jackson, who is 21 years old, and Devin Gardner, who is 20 years old. They're both of New Haven, have been arrested and taken in custody again for the shocking crime from more than 3 years ago. We don't have a lot of information about what led up to that arrest, but of course, as soon as we get that info, we'll update you right away.